First of all, everybody welcome, and appreciate Rachel's introduction. Yeah, I'm Justin Hoffman from Mobile and Web Strand here at Berkeley City College in MMR. And yeah, we're really excited to have you guys today, and as well as Peralta TV, to be here at our presentations. Let's start with Jackie. And after graduating from San Jose State University in graphic design, Jackie dedicated her attention to Silicon Valley, exploring the space where beauty and function intersect. During this time, Jackie created her own design company, Maid Service, as well as working for Zerb and Zuka Creative. Jackie has a passion for finding new ways to change the world through innovation and design, combining the skills of graphic, print, and interaction design. As Mike Kriegel of Morgan Stanley stated, I've seen Jackie do this hundreds of times. She takes some squishy idea from a client and turns it into stunningly clean design. She's exceptionally creative, detail-oriented, and quick to turn around projects. She has a great sense of humor and joy with her work. So most recently, Jackie is a visual designer for Beats Music, where they are changing the way people discover and share music in the digital age. 4 months ago, Beats was acquired by Apple, and now they have the same agenda and the support of one of the most culturally influential companies. May I present Jackie now?
Wow, hearing my bio from online right out loud is a trip. So you only read it to yourself in your head. Yeah, like Justin said, thank you for the awesome intro. Harris and I are really excited to be here. So we know each other through working together on a couple projects at Beats Music, and through Harris, I know Justin because they're buddies. So we're super excited to be here and just talk about sort of what we do and why we love what we do. My presentation, I will warn you now, is almost entirely emojis. Just because I'm basically going to talk. Pictures are fun to look at, but I'm basically going to just talk and show you some of my work. It's really just a little bit about myself and how I got to what I'm doing now and sort of my journey here. And this is the core of it. I really love what I do. I'm super grateful that I get to do the thing that I love more than anything every day, and I get to get paid for it. So it's super gratifying. So I hope that in your journey, whatever it is that you want to do, that this is sort of at the core. So my love for graphic design actually comes from music. When I first started getting into awful music when I was 15 or whatever, some teenage age, I would make all these mixtapes for my friends. And I would do a bunch of other side projects like that, but it all started from these mix CDs that I would record. And then I would design custom artwork for them using Microsoft Paint, or I think I did one in PowerPoint or something like that. So I would print them out and kind of make this custom little die cut sleeve thing and put the CD in it, and I did all kinds of shit like this. Personal projects that were a way for me to express myself. And then I got a little bit older and I learned that this is a career. It's called graphic design. You can actually learn how to do this well and get paid to do it. And that's how it all started, and I've been sort of doing that ever since, this direct path to learning how to be a good designer. And I'll talk a little bit about how I got into the digital space. So I went to school for graphic design, like Justin said. I went to San Jose State. It's a really great program, their graphic design program. I will say that it is very traditional. They do have a new media program there too, but I did the design program. And what I mean by traditional, and I guess this was a while ago, so it might have changed since then, is a lot of our coursework was centered around foundations of art, fundamentals of design, so gestalt and form and shape and color. I took lots of representational drawing classes where I would have to sit in front of an onion and draw it for 3 hours. So I got this really creative sort of foundation that I think really serves me well doing design now. And it was super fun. One other great thing about going to San Jose State is, since it was sort of a broad curriculum. They didn't want us, I mean, because you're in school, right? They want to expose you to everything that is potentially a path that you're going to take in your career. So I got to work on all kinds of projects, environmental design projects like wayfinding in a museum, or book design projects, poster design, informational graphics, packaging design, digital design, some websites, application design. There was even one project that we did where we designed currency, which is kind of an interesting challenge if you think about it, because it serves a very specific focus. How do you design money? But what was great about this, and I actually I applied what I did here to sort of my job hunt, was it kind of got my toes, I dipped my toes in all of these different avenues that I could potentially explore to kind of see what I was good at or what I liked doing. And so when I did eventually start working, I think this next slide starts to talk about my work. Yeah. Well, this is a representation of my design process a little bit. No. When you're first starting out in design, I mean, one of the reasons why you get into it is because you have good taste, right? You know what you like. You want to make stuff look really good. And when you're first starting out, that's not always the easiest. So a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of stress, just because you have this bar that's set for yourself and you know what looks good and you want to get it there, which is hard when you're first starting out. But through and through, I always came back to this. It's like, okay, I'm 72 hours and I haven't slept, but this is so much fun. And that was sort of my guiding light. I knew that this was the right path for me just because even through all of the hard work and the stress and all these pimples that I got from like not eating well and not sleeping was worth it because I really enjoyed what I was doing. And so that continued when I started working. And what I meant by what I applied sort of my curriculum to my job hunt was I wanted to try a lot of stuff because I still didn't know what I wanted to do. There's so many things that you can do with a degree in design. So I worked at a bunch of different agencies around this area that Justin mentioned. One of them is called Zuka Creative, and they kind of focus on point-of-purchase marketing, displays, and packaging. And I didn't really like print because the files were so big and it took so long to actually get something to production. And I really liked working on the web. While I was in school, I taught myself front-end development. And the immediacy of designing something and then being able to build it, I liked. And it's also a really innovative front, right? That's probably why you guys are all here. Smartphones have only been out for like under a decade, and I feel like, starting a career in this field, you have the potential to influence where that goes, because we're really only at the tip of the iceberg, which is super exciting to me. So I worked at a bunch of agencies. I did a bunch of different kinds of design work, corporate collateral, marketing websites, e-commerce websites. And then I found this agency called Zurb, Z-U-R-B. They're an awesome agency. They're in Campbell, which is about an hour south of here. And they're an agency that focuses specifically on digital product design and consulting for startups and large companies. So I got to work on products that hadn't even been built yet. I got to work on products for companies like Intuit or McAfee that already existed that maybe needed improving. But it's kind of where I decided that UI design and UX design was what I wanted to do. So I'm going to talk about some of the cooler projects that I've done there, or that I did there. I worked on a lot of like boring enterprise software, like database management type applications too, which are fun in a different way. But these are sort of the sexier, like more visually appealing, consumer-facing stuff that I did. This is a tablet reader called Trapit. And it is an app that is a smart content aggregator. So what I mean by smart is like super intelligent. It was built on the technology that Siri is built on, and it's basically like a feed reader. You basically tell it the things that you like, and the more you interact with it and the more you use it, the more relevant the results are that it will surface to you. So I got to represent that technology in this UI design. So you'll notice it looks a little sleek and techy, a little Minority Report-ish with these like kind of panes of glass floating in three, not only just two axes, but the Z axis as well. And conceptually, so this is where that like foundational art school stuff comes into play. I did this cool thing with the grid. Well, I think it's cool. Maybe you guys as users are like, this is totally confusing. I don't get it. But so the relevance of the articles to you, depending on how big it is or how close it is to you, are going to be more relevant. And the articles that maybe are less relevant will be a little bit harder to get to. So you have to like tap it to bring it to the forefront. But you can teach this application the things that you like by interacting with it more and using it. And it's supposed to learn your tastes as you get to as you use it more. I would like to say that if you are thinking about going into UX design, this sort of fidelity is not where you spend your time. This is the stuff I really geek out on. I love making stuff look beautiful. I love pushing pixels in Photoshop. But if you're building products, if that's what you want to do, this is your day, probably 75% of the time. This is where the challenges are. This is how you talk to engineers. Thinking through problems in sketches. You have to think through all these use cases, you have to solve all these problems, and doing it at a fidelity like this is just a lot quicker. So if you don't like sketching, maybe it's not for you. Here's another project that I did. And, as part of my process, I almost sketched the entire thing, like every flow, every screen, as much detail as I can get in sketch form so that when I go to the next phase, which is basically adding a little bit more fidelity to it, these are wireframes, sorry it's all blurry, when you get into this fidelity you can start paying attention to things like what do the words say, what is the messaging, you get a more accurate spatial relationship of like buttons and type size and stuff like that. But really, sketches and wireframes is where you're going to sort of spend most of your time solving problems. And then the visual design sort of layer comes last. But that stuff is still really fun to me too, the whole process. So this is the final design for an education app that it's an online college. It's an online degree that it's an online college where you can get your AA degree sort of at your own pace. It's kind of an innovative take on going to college. Basically, you can do it at your own pace. It's skill-based skills. It's not like history class or math. It's all stuff that's really relevant to getting a job. And this ended up being the final design. And here's another page. This is a course page. So you can see in terms of like the actual visual design of it, some of the concept behind the design. It's obviously super utilitarian, right? Because people have to use it to learn. It's about the content, not necessarily about the design. But there's sort of an homage to traditional analog classroom stuff. So like the typography is sort of modeled after how you might read a textbook. There's the tabs at the top. There's this little yellow call out. So there's elements of the design that represent education, but overall serves the content first. Okay, that's not really the stuff that I wanted to talk about, but I did feel like I should show you some work. The stuff that I really want to talk about goes back to that heart. All this time while I was in school and working at a job, I did a ton of pet projects, like a lot. This goes back to the mixtapes that I used to make, right? So that persisted all the way through my career, and that's sometimes you get burned out or jaded a little bit from doing this as a job or for a client and not for yourself. So my outlet for that is just working on stuff that I wanted to work on. It didn't have to be for anyone. It didn't have to actually serve a function. It just had to be stuff that I liked. And so I'm going to go through some of those projects, and this kind of kept me sane in my career journey. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that I love. I love food. And so I decided one weekend that I was going to make a website about sandwiches because I love sandwiches. And just because it was fun, just because I needed to get something creative out. And so it's basically this website that you can go to and you hit a refresh button and it generates a sandwich. I mean, it's not really for anyone, but I had a lot of fun doing it. I really love movies, in particular horror movies. So I did this really geeky project where I took movies and their remakes and I did like an analysis of and I kind of pitted them against each other, like talking thematically about the themes in them, the director differences, stuff like that. It was, again, for no one but maybe someone else who might be super interested in horror movies. I'm not really sure, but it was fun for me. I really love traveling. So one of my most, I think, valuable projects, ongoing projects that I do is, I also really suck at photography, is every time I go somewhere, instead of having like a Facebook album or whatever, I create a website to sort of commemorate that experience. And it's a way for me, this is the first one that I went to Europe 3.5 years ago, and I made this website, and it was a lot of work, but like having this sort of like digital scrapbook of this thing that I did as part of my life that will kind of live on forever, that I got to make, helped commemorate in some way, and so I kept doing it. This is when I went to Seattle. I've been to Seattle a couple times for the same trip, and I just reskin it every time. This was one trip that I took earlier this year to Maui, and this is the mobile application of that. So, I mean, these are really all projects for nobody else but myself. But it combines my first love, which is design, with other things that I'm really passionate about in my life, and I don't know, it sort of validates that I chose this because I really enjoy it. I really love cats. Unfortunately, I don't have a cat project because there are so goddamn many cat projects on the internet, so I thought maybe I didn't want to saturate the internet with more, but it's probably coming at some time in the future. And that brings us back full circle. I have a couple of music pet projects on the side. One is a mixtape project that I do with my friend Andy, where we just post playlists online. But going through all of those jobs and doing all of these pet projects and working at Zerb, where I got to work on a bunch of different products, helped me decide. Every project I did, I learned a little bit more about myself. And where that got me was, I want to work in music. I want to forward that agenda. I feel like we're just starting to figure that out, and that brings me to my current job at Beats Music. Have any of you guys ever used it? Maybe for the free trial, and then you let it expire because it costs money. I'm not offended. But what I found in combining things that I love is I am super excited to go to work every day because I get to work on this problem that I feel passionately about. I do feel like there's a lot of improvement that can be done in terms of streaming music. Just because you have access to 20 million songs doesn't necessarily mean that you know what the hell to do with them. And so that's what we are trying to do at Beats Music. 4 months ago, we were acquired by Apple, and which is really exciting because one of the biggest companies in the world now sort of gets to continue driving this vision forward. And day to day, some of the stuff that I get to do there is work on the consumer-facing product, which is what you see here across all the platforms. We're on iPad and Android and Windows and the web, but I also get to work on some of the stuff that you don't get to see as consumers, which is how I know Harris. We worked on an internal project together, tools. We worked on a dashboard project together, but with an awesome team, and it really all comes down to this for me. So find the thing that you would do as your mixtape project for your friends, the thing that you do in your spare time for free, and I think that vocational happiness follows suit. That's it.
Harris Adagioli, an engineering major in college. While at Johns Hopkins, he took an entry-level programming class and could not connect with it, thinking coding was not really an avenue of preference. Although years later, music drew him back to learning code. Harris is now a prolific iOS developer, since helping with the development of software architecture for audio startup Pulse Locker in 2013. And so Pulse Locker is, well, they'll tell you about it, I'm assuming. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Hodis has coded for Beats Music, Soch Concierge, an application featured by Apple as one of the best new apps, and Detour, a new startup created by the founder of Groupon. When he's not surfing with his friends in Ocean Beach, he has also found time to create a new dynamic note-taking app called Mentions, which is available in app stores everywhere, and an auto-visualization framework called Easy Audio for core audio. We're happy to have Harris. Here's.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Another round for Jackie. It's freaking amazing. So my part of the presentation is going to be kind of more towards the side of kind of like the coding perspective. So it's like after we have like that like really awesome design, like first kind of like what goes into my mind when I think of design and code, and then what kind of comes out of that as well. So to begin, I'm just going to give kind of a little background about myself. So like Jackie, I've been really, really passionate about music my entire life, which is kind of what's fueled every decision that I've made. Actually, growing up, I really just thought I was going to be a rock star, and it's still in process right now. But I do a little bit of coding these days. But the way that I got into that was actually when I went to college. I studied electrical engineering and music, and I swore I was going to figure out a way to combine the two. And kind of when I was like, as I was studying, I found that like a lot of the things that I was learning in kind of like the engineering curriculum were really dry, and it was really hard for me to like connect all these kind of abstract, like all these equations and all this code that I was kind of like, you know, learning the theory behind it. I was kind of having a hard time connecting the dots with what, what the stuff was actually going to make in the real world. Like, what was the practical use of any of this? So, you know, going throughout college, I kind of found my calling with signal processing. So essentially, you can think of signal processing as like, if I'm a guitarist and I strum my guitar and I have like a little stomp pedal, that has a bunch of different effects in it. It's going to have a distortion effect, or like a little chorus effect or something. So I designed those little effects. And in addition, a lot of the stuff that I do these days is particularly for like iOS and Mac type of development. And a couple of the projects towards the end of college that got me more into this stuff was I wrote this little like, so starting with electrical engineering, everything that I made was not really software based, it's actually more hardware. So I was like building these chips, and I did something my senior year where I decided that I was just going to I was going to take an Arduino board, and I was going to create a beat and pitch detector that was going to output the whatever beat there was and whatever key it was in some kind of binary scheme. And this is not the coolest thing, but essentially this is my first project. There it is. So it kind of bobs its head to the beat, and then it kind of tells you what key it's in. And I thought this was like the coolest thing, and I was like telling my advisor, like, I think I figured it out, man. Like, this is the coolest thing. And he was like, okay. But when I graduated, I ended up getting more into the software, and I realized I was like, man, there's so much you can do with music and software these days. So I so as soon as I graduated from college, I learned, I took a C++ book, and I just read it from start to finish, which is like the worst way to learn a language. I like learn nothing from it. But then I, keeping kind of the theme with music, I hope this isn't going to blast the speaker system, but okay, no, it's not. So I created what's called a waveform generator. So we've all seen kind of like, or maybe not, whatever, but you can generate all these different type of waveforms. You can create like sine waves and noise. You can create, this is what's called a sawtooth wave. And they all have like really interesting tones. But for me, what this project was is a way to get away from this and actually get to something that like we could see. And I thought this was like the coolest thing. So I kind of kept going down that road to other concepts. So, for instance, there's a concept in dubstep music where you have like the wobbly bass. I'm sure we've all heard the wobbly bass in dubstep music. And what that's created from is a low frequency oscillator, also known as an LFO. And the way that those are created, I was doing a little research, was that you take whatever that waveform we saw in that last app, and then you just like multiply it by another little waveform at a much lower frequency. And I know this sounds really like techie or whatever, but it has a pretty cool effect. You can hear it. Okay, well you can't really hear it, but I swear it's cool. But essentially, this was kind of my way, yeah. So you can see kind of like a very low frequency waveform being applied to this audio waveform to apply a little dubstep effect. To me, that was like the coolest thing. I'm still very much into dubstep music, so I just thought, I was like, I'm finally doing it, this is it. But where that kind of ended up was I kind of worked on a bunch of these type of projects because kind of in the same vein as like what Jackie was saying, like I just thought this was like the coolest thing. It's just super interesting to me. And like the interfaces got a little bit more complex as it went on, so I like created this like just little audio recorder and like playback kind of engine. And then yeah, I was just like recording music into it, displaying like kind of what's happening in the frequency axis here. And the reason I was doing this is because like I came from like a very engineering-y background. Yeah. So for me, I came from a very engineering background, so all these type of concepts of like creating like custom filters and things like that were things that I was like really good at theoretically, but I wanted to prove to myself that I could actually do it in some kind of practical sense. And then where that kind of ended up getting me was I started freelancing for a company called Pulse Locker because they're kind of interested in some of the apps that I was doing. And what Pulse Locker is a so it's a company actually pretty similar to Beats, but the I think this is way too much visual stimulation though. There we go. No, party's over. So I started freelancing at Pulse Locker, and what I kind of learned through that process was I was very familiar with how audio kind of worked, but now I was not just like designing like an application, but I was actually put in charge of designing an entire system. And when I think about design, I think about there's a lot of different like facets of design. There's designing a user interface, like there's really clean layout, and then what software's kind of taught me is that there's also like architectural design. So like when I talk about like a system, I'm talking about something like Facebook is a system. It's not just like an iPhone app. It's actually like it lives on the web, it lives on your phone, it lives like a bunch of different places. So there's a bunch of different like teams that work together as well. So at Facebook there's like an iPhone team, there's an Android team, there's like a web team, there's what's called like a backend team. And all those people work in collaboration to create like these really, really polished kind of end products. And what I had to do at Pulse Locker was essentially create that architecture. So create that backend. Actually, the CTO, Ryan Walsh of Pulse Locker at the time, joked with me and he was like, "You're going to write an audio player, but you just have to get the data to it first." So, such a nerd. But yeah, essentially I worked at Pulse Locker for a while and we built out kind of the entire architecture for the system. And what I kind of learned through that process was when you design something, there's user-facing design that you need to be really clean, really polished. But in terms of software, like when you design things, you should be kind of designing them beautiful from the inside out. And what I kind of mean by that is like when you write your code or when you like design a piece of a system, you have to think about how other people will be consuming that as well. So like for me as like a programmer, like I'm creating like kind of an interface for other programmers to use my stuff. So like when I'm thinking about like writing my code, I'm not just thinking about my own code, but I'm thinking about like how are other people going to be using my code. So for instance, like when I was working on the project at Beats, and kind of the nature of how I work now. Right now, I just work as like a freelance iOS and Mac app developer, and kind of the nature of that is when I work on a project for 2-3 months pretty intensely, and then I have to hand it off to the team, and it's my job to make sure that like whatever I hand off to the team, I'm not just like, all right, here you go, you know, like kind of don't call me, but more of it is actually about like, okay, I'm gonna hand this off in like the cleanest possible way so that we can actually like, so you guys can take it from here and like build on top of this. There's kind of this whole concept in like software engineering where like you want to design like a good system because you're gonna always be building off of something. So if you don't have a good foundation, it's sort of like a table without legs. If you have a table with very weak legs, as soon as you put a book on it, it's just gonna like fall flat. Legs are gonna break right off. So you could apply bandages, so kind of solutions to it, but the initial design process is just so important to prevent these type of issues. Kind of moving on from pulse locker and stuff like that, I recently have been working on a few different projects. Specifically, I wrote an audio framework, as Justin mentioned earlier. I wrote an audio framework for Mac and iOS called Easy Audio, and it is. So, right now it's a simple framework for other developers to use to do all sorts of different audio tasks. Specifically, I can show you some examples. So it's sort of like a multi-use framework that lets you do like a bunch of different things. So there's a lot of missing pieces from like Mac and iOS. Like they don't provide these type of like audio waveforms that we're used to seeing. Specifically, we're probably more used to seeing like these type of like rolling waveforms from like SoundCloud and things like that. So this is sort of like the missing piece for a lot of that stuff in iOS and Mac. And so I kind of wrote these components, and there's a whole bunch of them. There's one like this that's like kind of boring waveform, and then there's stuff that like plays back audio. So it's kind of just like a multi-use framework. And I wrote this because like, you know, my work at Pulse Soccer, I was realizing like, okay, I'm writing a bunch of this kind of boilerplate audio code. I want to create something so like I can. Oh, now the sound's working. So I wanted to write something so I can do kind of like basic audio processing and prototype it like really, really quickly. And then also have kind of like a visual representation that I can use for guidance. And I kind of created a bunch of different components, not really worried about like, I wasn't too worried about people using it specifically. I just wanted to make something that was very useful because of all the projects that I worked on in industry. I was like, this is like a serious problem that I'm constantly rewriting all this stuff. And kind of the end result of writing Easy Audio was now it's one of the most used audio frameworks in the world for iOS and Mac that people use to do all their sorts of crazy projects. But it arose out of the needs. Like one need is like there's all these kind of audio things like I want microphone input, I want to create these fancy waveforms, and I want them to actually look good. Like I don't want just like there's a lot of really like bad looking waveforms, but there's ones that like you'd actually want to use in like your commercial projects. And kind of going down this vein, I wanted to see kind of how far I could push it because I had no idea how I was gonna write Easy Audio in the beginning. It was like a very daunting thing, but I found that the best way to do is just like like jump right in to any project that you think is way too hard for you. Like I've actually have a confession to make. My entire career, every project I've worked on, I've had this like fear that whoever I'm working with is gonna find out I'm not actually as smart as I've let on, you know? But then you kind of just like, you're just kind of there, and you know, if you can take it, you actually learn a lot from the experience and you'll make some pretty cool stuff. There is a kind of cool example I wanted to show you guys. Yeah. So this, I'm about to release a new version of Easy Audio, kind of having learned through that first process. Having learned a bunch of stuff from that first process of writing Easy Audio 1, kind of learned like, okay, that was like this crazy thing that I never thought I could write, but then like it got written, and then I learned like, okay, based on that process, like there's so many things I could have done better. And no matter what you work on, you're always gonna like get to the end of it. The most important part is like to finish your first version, because you'll get to the end of it, no matter what, and be like, man, there's so many things I could have done better. Like, you know, all this stuff. But I think going through the process gives you insight into like what iterations you need to work on to make it like the best possible product. There's actually, I think it's Ed Catmull, one of the Pixar guys. He had a quote that I really enjoyed, which is, he said, "The first version of every Pixar movie is terrible, because they just keep iterating on it and keep working on it until it's really good." And that's sort of what I do with a lot of my professional work. I kind of start with a version that's like kind of cool, and I just keep building on top of it, kind of adding layers of complexity. And so this is kind of like the current state of what Easy Audio is at. I thought it would be cool to have a circular waveform, and I was trying to figure out how I can do that in like a cool, interactive way. And kind of the inspiration for this came from actually working at Beats, because I learned a lot of lessons just from that experience, specifically related to design, because I was so blown away by like how great the designers were there. Like I was like, you know, crazy impressed with Jackie. The whole design team there is really, really, really great. But I learned a lesson in what it is to be consistent in your design. So like for this interface, the idea came from a very, very random place, but it actually came from here. This little volume knob. So I went on a trip, and I went into this little electronics store, and they had all these old analog volume knobs, and I was like, man, these are so cool. Like, you know, these no one really uses these anymore, and I'm an old school kind of audio, electrical engineer kind of guy, so I nerded out with these, and I have like 10 of them at home that I was like playing with. And I was like, man, it would be so cool to make a, just to like design one of these in like an iOS app, you know, because that was predominantly what I was doing at that time. So then I ended up, let's see, here. So I ended up designing an interface for it. Oh boy, that's a big one. Let's try 50. Okay. And specifically just trying to recreate that little slider. And I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. This is actually getting closer to what like the vision is. And then I was like, okay, well, I have one piece of the puzzle, but what I want to do here is create like a cool just interface based on that one component, but I want the entire interface to feel like one like kind of consistent design type of interface. And I just watched the movie Tron, and I was like, okay, it has to be dark and green. And so that's kind of where like the inspiration from that came from. And then, you know, that kind of transformed into, you know, this little audio project, but it was that's where all these little knobs came from. These, you know, they're just tinted green, but it's, the interface as a whole, you know, what my goal was just to make it feel consistent. And, you know, you don't have to have insanely complex looking controls for every single piece of the puzzle. For some of them, like a lot of times, like it actually works out to use like kind of like default controls, like these little sliders that come with the OS. Like they actually worked really well in this context. But you know, there was kind of this part of me that wanted to customize every single piece of it. Like I thought, like, oh my gosh, I'm like making custom buttons, custom sliders, like everything's got to be custom. But it actually, like, you know, you have to have a steady hand, I think, and good design. And yeah, that's one of my recent projects. And then the other recent project is just an app called Mentioned. And I think the cool thing about Mentioned, just to bring this back for a minute, is the goal of that was to create a system and not just sort of like a specific app. So the idea for it is essentially this. So you go in, I don't know if you can actually see it, but essentially you can go into something, add a note about anything, and just have it automatically looked up for you, so you can just go check it out on the fly. And that was just the basic premise. And this is actually, I might just play a little bit of this because it's very important. Yeah, classic stuff right there. So yeah, that's the Fox. But essentially, the idea for Mention was to have like a note-taking app that automatically just looks stuff up for you. That was kind of like a pet project for me. And there are a few different components at work. So there is like the iPhone interface for it, but there's also a backend, which is the guy who's actually looking up all this data. And what I wanted to have for Mentioned was a way to essentially have a way for me to go in and like be able to design the backend in a way that I thought was also beautiful, and give me sort of a way to like design my system. So Mention, as the iPhone app, you know, it's just a bunch of categories, and then it has just like notes kind of per category. And what the backend does is it just kind of like maintains all these categories and tables, kind of those boring tables that Jackie was talking about earlier. And it kind of contains these guys, and it contains information about these guys. And I thought kind of like the cool thing about having this system was being able to kind of query it in a bunch of like different interesting kind of ways, so you can like see. So what this is referred to is like I wrote a backend for something, and it's just like in the industry you just call it like an API. And what this does is like it's essentially like a server that you can hit that will give you data about a system. So for Mention's API, it'll give you data about like notes, and you can look up users and see what their notes are, and see what your notes are, and kind of query interesting things like that. But every single big company actually has an API for you to hit. So like you can go to developer.anything, and you'll see that like Facebook has what they call the Graph API. And from the Graph API, you can actually just pull information about like your Facebook account. You can see all your friends and stuff. And with that data, it kind of opens you up to do a lot of really cool things. Like it lets you create any sort of visualization you can think of, and you can kind of design interesting like user kind of interfaces for the same data set. So like Facebook looks a certain way, but you could use like Facebook's API to make like a bajillion different Facebook iPhone apps if you wanted to. It's all about the data, and I think good design is kind of just about making like that content key. So yeah, that was kind of the process for mentioning. It was actually it was less of a design process in terms of like the interface, and more of a design process in creating a system, like having the back end and having like a website and having like a like an iPhone app and having them all talk together in kind of like a cohesive way. So I actually don't really have that much else, and I'm not sure if this was too inspirational, but that's what I got.
So what we were thinking is afterwards we'd have a little discussion with our two panel speakers because they both represent the two sides of the design aspect. We have the designer and then we have the programmer. Okay, so can you guys tell us a little bit about the workflow between the designer and the programmer on a project?
Sure. Do you want to?
Sure. So the way that I like to work, and this is how we did it at Beats Music, was we like to involve sort of all the stakeholders in the product early on. So like defining the product and defining the features. That includes marketing, that includes engineering, that includes design, that includes product, just so everyone sort of has a seat at the table and input in defining what that is. And then what we'll do after that is product and design will sort of get together and build specifications, requirements, and what we actually think, what is this UI going to manifest itself as. And then when it sort of becomes substantial, then re-involving the engineers, showing them wireframes, showing them sketches, like this is what we think we're going to build, getting their feedback, a lot of feedback along the way, so that they can bring to the table what are some of the technical constraints. Here are some red flags I see. When you're working at a job, there's always deadlines, right? There's always goals that you're trying to meet. So trying to juggle all of those pieces together to be able to get something out the door that's useful, but in a timely manner. And all of it is iterative. So, we don't just go away into a hole and design a whole product, and then I am like, okay, Harris, here you go, build it. And then he goes into a hole, and he builds it, and then he comes back, and he's like, here it is, and then he leaves forever. That would be awful. So all the time we're talking, we're getting feedback from all kinds of people in terms of the design and sort of incorporating it as we go. And the feedback iteration loop just happens continuously. So I don't know if you want to add more of that, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, so like for the dashboard project that we're working on, it went through a lot of different iterations, and I think starting off, we kind of came to a set of like constraints for what it was going to be and how it was going to look and feel. But then there are always things kind of like along the way that you kind of realize, oh, like we need this feature, or like we need one of the constraints was, or maybe this is like a feature, but it was that it needed to work on a like 13-inch MacBook Air. And it also needed to work in like a 52-inch like giant TV in Dre's office or something, yeah. So, and like the text had to kind of like resize itself accordingly. So, and that's not actually supported by Mac. So, there's kind of pushback from like, some directions. But I think that like that process though of going through that, like I was just like, man, I have no idea how I'm gonna do this. But we actually ended up coming up with like a solution to like make it work. And I think that's like a really good example of how like in that process, like design can fuel engineering. Like it can kind of like push the engineers to try harder to like actually kind of like innovate and like do something really cool. Versus like if sometimes if an engineer is just left to choose like what the interface is going to look like, you're like, well, this button comes with it and this slider comes with it, so I choose these two. So
I think vice versa. I think vice versa too. A lot of times when working with engineers, they have a lot of things that they're really excited about or things that they know that they can do that we're not always privy to because we're not engineers. And so just being open and talking about that and being excited about it helps, I think, make a more exciting product that you both are excited about working on.
Okay. I have another question now. All right, so clearly from your presentation, it's actually quite interesting. So you both had an extreme passion for music. And it's really interesting that you had a passion for music at the start, right? And then you followed these different paths and ended up back in music again, which is pretty amazing, right? So now you're just iterating music in the digital world when in the beginning it was kind of the inspiration for a lot of the work you do, right? So other than that, can you tell us a little bit about the things that you would recommend for a young designer as far as what to follow, what kind of other, besides just pure inspiration and love and joy of what you were doing, are there other things, whether it be technical, maybe motivational things along the way in order to get to where you were?
Sure. What helped me a lot in motivating myself was surrounding myself with people I really was inspired by. So surrounding yourself with people that you're sort of in awe of, that just drive you to keep getting better at what you do. And then also just staying abreast of the industry, like what is this new app that came out? Why is everyone talking about it? What's all this hype around this new branding project that this big agency did? And inundating yourself with the stuff that excites you gets me motivated every day.
Yeah. I agree with Jackie. Actually, when I first got into programming, I moved out here, and I had like just such a great community of friends, and my brother was out here too, and he's a really great programmer as well. So I had a community of just like people I was very inspired by, and it kind of pushed me to sort of like learn, I think, at a faster rate. And it also kind of helps you. It helps you move through a lot of the friction that you'll find early in the process. Like anytime you try something new, or anytime you try to push yourself through like a plateau, you go through this like pain period, where you're just like, oh, I'm terrible, blah, blah, blah. This is never gonna work. But then once you get past that, you're like, oh my gosh, like I've had all these realizations, and I feel like I'm amazing at this. And I think it's really helpful to have people around you that can, one, like help you kind of get through those pain periods, because you see them, like you see them they've gotten through those pain periods already. But also, I remember when I was first programming audio, the joke is that like you never do it with headphones on, because if you mess up anything in your calculations, it would just it'll be like a bunch of noise in your ears, and you're just like kind of like, I just did this the other day, so it's just kind of like it would just be like all this like white noise, and you have to like take your headphones off and like throw them at the wall. So I had like a bunch of these problems when I was starting, so it was literally like a pain period. And I remember like my friend Ryan from UCSB's Media Arts and Technology program, he was like, oh, like dude, your buffer's off by 1. That's what he said. And then that helped me out. Like that would have been like 2 weeks of work trying to figure out what that was, So I think surround yourself with great people.
Okay. So surround yourself with great people and be open to emotional and almost physical pain.
Get through the pain period.
Here, I'll give you guys a mic. Does anybody have questions in the audience? Okay, so we'll grab the other mic.
Hello. You said in the beginning, reading a book was the worst way to learn a programming language. So, what would be a good way to learn a language? And if you have some advice for that, thank you.
Take a course.
Take a course at Berkeley City. Well, I guess it depends on the type of learner that you are. So I learn really well with videos. So I found that if I were to watch videos, I learned at just much faster pace. Even just for the fact that like I would watch the video and be like, hey, like that person understood this. I can totally understand that too. You know, with a book, it's kind of like theoretically someone understood this enough to write this. But the only reason I say the book, just reading the book was a terrible way to proceed was because it's like learning spoken language. It's like imagine reading like a Spanish textbook from start to finish, and at the very end, you're not going to say, I know Spanish. Like I can go talk to anyone on the street and, you know, be fluent. It's about practice and some sort of practical context. So I think what the music was for me was a way to get context. So I could say, man, like I want to make I just want to play an audio file. So I need to learn enough programming so I can make that happen. So I think it's kind of like a design exercise in some ways, because for me, what I did was I chose a language. So I said, like, here's my first constraint, C++. Like, I heard that's a cool language. Like, seriously, that was my justification. I was like, I've heard it's a cool language, and I want to play an audio file. That's all I'm going to do. And it took me like a month to learn how to do that. But by that point, I had learned, I got the audio file playing, but I had learned all the syntactical things that you will learn in the books through the process of working on something that I actually really wanted to work on. So the beef that I had with the books was that I'd always work on like projects that weren't so interesting to me, you know. So I'd write like a command line thing to like, just do some really computer science-y things that are not interesting to me. You know.
Oh, Mike, it's okay. Could Jackie have an answer to him too? Yeah.
Ditto. No. Actually, I want to go back to what Harris said about it. It's really what type of learner you are. I can't learn from reading books. The way that I taught myself how to do front-end code is learning from what other people did. So I tinker. That's how I learn. That's how I become a better designer, is I just play. So I would like download all this free open source stuff from the internet and then kind of involve myself in what someone had already written. Granted, you do run the risk of like, what if they're a horrible developer and you downloaded some crap code and now you're learning from that. But it got me somewhere where I wasn't before. And so that's kind of been my MO up until now. But there's a lot of available courseware that you can take now. So if like videos is your thing, there's Team Treehouse, who does classes on all kinds of programming. I think they even do like marketing courses now, and they're all video based. And each course is usually like a project, so it's also hands-on too. You're watching this video, but you're making this thing. So there's all kinds of resources. Like Going Here, it's also one of them. So yeah.